course, you're welcome to grab coffee and food, but we're going to get started because we have a tight schedule this morning. Good morning. My name is Stacey Matlen. I'm Senior Vice President of Innovation at the Partnership for New York City, which is a nonprofit representing the business leaders, civic-minded organization, and I oversee our innovation programs, which include the Transit Tech Lab, which is a program working with the MTA and all the regional transit agencies in New York to help test technologies that solve pressing challenges, as well as the Environmental Tech Lab working with New York City Department of Environmental Protection, working to make sure that our climate change impacts are mitigated and understanding how new technology can help make sure our infrastructure is sustained. So today we have a really exciting and dynamic discussion. We are doing what the most important part of a design thinking and innovation process, which is starting with the problem. You'll hear from 4 public sector experts who will describe core challenges that they are having today, which this sort of model, it's the same model that we use in our public sector programs where we first work with all of our agency partners to understand their priorities, and then we facilitate and find solutions. And so really, from last year, this was my favorite panel of the entire conference, so you guys are in for a treat. And what better way to start off a morning than hearing from the public sector around some of their core challenges? So this has direct applicability to every type of stakeholder in the room. If you're in the public sector, I would encourage you to think about if you're facing similar challenges, how you might be able to go up to that person afterwards and converse about your challenges. Maybe you can collaborate on some lessons learned. If you're a startup or in the private sector, you might have solutions to these problems, and you might want to approach these folks afterwards to share how you might be able to solve these problems. And then if you're in the VC or investor or academia, you might have ideas around how to co-create solutions there. So without further ado, I will ask my presenters one by one to come up. The format is they will each have 3 to 5 minutes to share a top challenge that they're facing. And then at the end, we'll facilitate a solution. But even if we don't have time to facilitate all the discussions and understand how your solutions might be able to solve some of their challenges, we will have time at the end. So feel free to go up to them and share some lessons learned afterwards. So with that, I will hand it off to Jameson Auten, CEO of Lane Transit District, who will talk about reimagining the ride.
Thank you. Why aren't there any lights? Where are we actually going, Dad? I said, that's exactly where we're going, right there. You see, where we moved from in Kansas City, the MSA there is half the population of the entire state of Oregon. So not a whole lot of people there. About 250,000 people in the area that we service, which is about the size of the state of Connecticut. So what we have is a lot of rural. We have a ton of rural. And as we come out of the pandemic, we're trying to imagine how do we best provide a utility to the service that is a college town surrounded by a lot of rural. Now we have some unique advantages. We have some unique resources there. We have a university. We have University of Oregon there. We have Oregon State about 40 miles up the road as well. So we have some engineers as well. We have a pretty good community college. So when we think about reimagining the ride, we're thinking about how do we connect people in the town, and I don't even call it downtown because if you've not been there, it's interesting. How do we connect people in town to the people in the rural areas, and how do we provide service in the rural areas that makes sense and pencils out? When I say pencil out, if you look at LA Metro and you look at their financials, you'll see that their cost per revenue hour, their cost per mile is a certain number. But if you go out into the rurals where we serve, it goes way up. So how do we report that? How do we look at outcomes, real outcomes, not just ridership numbers? You'll hear a lot of transit systems talk about, we're 80% of our pre-pandemic numbers and we're coming back. There was hundreds of millions of dollars given to transit systems throughout the pandemic. Saying you're at 80% of your ridership isn't going to be the answer that the next Congress is going to want to hear. So what we're focusing on in Lane County is, what are the outcomes that matter to our communities, and how can we use public transportation as a vehicle to affect those outcomes in positive ways? So for example, small Eugene has the highest per capita instances of homelessness in the nation, small little Eugene. We also have a housing shortage as well. We have housing costs that are skyrocketing, thanks to the Californians in the room that are moving there. But we're trying to look at how do we impact those, and we're aligning our outcomes to the top outcomes of our communities that we serve. So that's what we're doing. And then I think for us, we're looking at it in 3 different ways. Foundational levels, making sure that service is reliable and that it's there when you need it. Looking at our relationships, but then also as aspirational, looking at how do we tie everything together. We're not interested in operating everything, but we're certainly interested in coordinating and making sure it's facilitated well so that the customer has a low barrier of hurdle to use the system and the system works for them well. And we'll be tying those to different outcomes. And we think that once we get to that point where we have a high confidence in the system, we can start to gather metrics that help us to tap into other funding sources that don't necessarily say DOT on them. For instance, healthcare, access to healthcare would be important where we are. We feel we can show ROI there. We also think that we can show an ROI to make a business case across several sectors, including housing. So that's what we're working on in Eugene, and we'll be happy to talk more about it.
Great. Thank you, Jameson. Up next, we have Greg Spots, Director of, well, we can, let's, Craig, you're on stage. Let's do Craig. Craig. Let's go with Craig. Associate Assistant Deputy Minister for Policy, Transport Canada, who will talk about Beyond Barriers, Inclusive Travel Through Innovation and Accessibility.
Good morning, everyone, and thanks for that, Stacey. It is great to be with so many people in the innovation space for transportation, and our challenge really is around accessible transportation, and I think we all share the objective together of a more seamless, sustainable, and inclusive travel journey for all people and all travelers in the transportation system, and that also includes people with disabilities. And in Canada, we have over 1 in 5 who identify as having a disability. And that's growing as the definition of what it is to be disabled grows. It's also growing because the expansion of what we understand to be disabled is moving into areas like cognitive health and wellness. So these are all factors to consider in design, programs, policies. So for us, as the Government of Canada, we committed to a barrier-free Canada by 2040. So that's our challenge, is to think about our transportation system so that it's not leaving anyone behind. And to do that, we're abiding by the principle, nothing without us. And this principle ensures active consultation and participation from persons with disabilities when developing policies and programs that impact them. And so the video that's on now illustrates the inclusive approach that Via Rail, so our Amtrak, employed in designing its new fleet of rail cars being deployed now from Quebec City to Toronto. And they involve the disability community in every step along their design journey in designing those rail cars. They integrated accessible features into their passenger fleet, from accessible boarding platforms to thoughtfully designed interior spaces, adjusting with the feedback of accessibility groups that they got in real time along the way and working with the OEM Siemens. They adopted an inclusive mindset by making sure that different design features, table areas, lighting, color contrasts, all had in mind the end user. So the video really encapsulates a vision where accessible transportation is integral to the entire journey and not an afterthought. It's built in from the beginning. And so we're trying to draw inspiration from what Via's done with designing their rail cars into other modes of transportation. So one of our big challenges is around air travel. Of course, complicated because there's international connections that need to be made, international standards have to be adjusted, so it requires collaboration through forums like ICAO. But we are looking to see how do we improve the journey for those who are disabled. It includes making sure that data is being gathered. Not enough of it is. We need to find new ways to gather that data so we can help that inform our policies and programs and design. But it also includes public awareness. So ensuring that there's education with the traveling public to gain empathy and understanding for adjustments that do need to be made. And break down stereotypes and stigma. And on the other hand, with transportation service providers, prove and test why it's so important to have an inclusive design, because it just broadens your traveler base and it makes it easier for end users to use their services. So at the end of the day, transportation, inclusive transportation is a shared responsibility, and the goal extends beyond simply the physical aspects to creating something where everybody can participate. So it's a whole trip chain accessibility approach that we need to take, but I think we're open to how do we arrive at that. VIA's shown us one way to do it, and I think there are other ways to make sure that we're meeting the test we've given ourselves of a barrier-free Canada by 2040. Thanks.
Amazing. Thank you. All right. Dre, would you like to go next? All right, we have Dre Kalili, Deputy Director of Transportation Harbors, Hawaii Department of Transportation.
Thank
Talking
you.
about strategies and technologies for planning for and managing sea level rise at the ports.
Aloha and good morning. Hawaii is more than 2,000 miles away from the largest landmass, which is probably California. I'm responsible for overseeing all of our commercial ports. There are 9 of them that operate in a hub and spoke system. That distance means that that's the distance that all our goods that we consume in state that we have to bring in must travel. So of all the goods we consume, that's food, fuel, clothes, spam, rice, all of that, all of that we consume, 80% has to come in. And of that 80%, 99% come through our commercial harbor system. So our harbors are a critically important economic lifeline for all the islands. That said, sea level rise is very real for us. And that's the challenge that we're faced with today. I was appointed into this role at the beginning of the year, and when I got there, I found out no one had planned for sea level rise. So over the last 11 months, we've been looking at different projections for what that sea level rise and other climate change impacts will look like. What's fun and interesting is that at all levels of government, federal, state, and our municipalities, all the agencies at those levels that are looking at sea level rise projections have numbers ranging all over the place. One agency says that the sea level rise that we should plan for is 3 feet. Another agency says 9 feet. Well, which is it? Because planning for that 6-foot variance looks very different across our harbor's infrastructure. So the challenge that I have is, one, how do I make heads or tails of the data that we've been given? Or do we go out and collect our own data, right? Is the first investment we need to make monitoring systems to collect the data that we need that's site-specific. And then understanding, too, that solutions for sea level rise are very site-specific. What works in ports in your jurisdictions or near where you live may not work for us in Hawaii, but how your ports got to that point where they planned and they identified solutions, that strategy, that approach, the consideration, the methodology might be incredibly helpful to us. So what we're looking at is we absolutely need our harbors to work in order for us to live. I can't emphasize that enough. So 20 years from now, or 50 years from now, or 100 years from now, the decisions that we make today, the investments we make today, need to ensure that rice and spam can still come into our islands way far into the future. So what I'm looking for is any insight, tips, connections that will really help us get where we need to go, planning today for those projections at whatever time horizon. So we've applied for a PROTECT grant. We're looking for some planning money to put that together. We have that scope of work together. But before we put that bid out on the street, I want to make sure that we're covering, our scope really covers what we need to, considering what we are trying to accomplish over the next 100 years or so. So with that, I look forward to chatting with many of you to figure out where we go from here. Thank you.
Thanks, Jay. All right, last but not least, Greg Spotts, Director of Seattle DOT. The topic is, would like a means to coordinate modes during a major special event, such as Seattle hosting the World Cup.
Good morning, everybody. All right, thanks for coming out early. I'm Greg Spotts, Director of Seattle Department of Transportation. I spent 15 years working for the city of LA and just moved to Seattle 14 months ago. I had been working as the number 2 in the Bureau of Street Services here, helping to make LA more walkable, bikeable, transit-friendly, greener, and climate resilient. And it was really exciting to see this opportunity to move to Seattle and run the transportation department there. When I was here, I had a chance over 15 years to work in every one of the 99 registered neighborhoods in LA. And I was trying to figure out, how can I just drop into Seattle and make decisions without knowing the communities and the neighborhoods? And so the summer of 2022, I put up a web link to enable small groups of Seattleites to take me for a walk, a bike ride, or a transit ride, and show me what's working in their neighborhood and what needs improvement. And I've actually done more than 100 of those community walks in my first year. But while I was having that listening tour, there was two things I already knew that were very important to Seattle and very important to Mayor Bruce Harrell. And that was improving safety for vulnerable users on our streets, and preparing to host major special events like the World Cup, which is coming to Seattle and some other cities in 2026. So I want to talk to you about two potential opportunities to work with us. One pertains to street safety and one pertains to special events. On my first day on the job, September 7th, 2022, I initiated a top-to-bottom review of our Vision Zero safety program, because although we were implementing a lot of industry standard smart things, the number of people getting killed or seriously injured on our streets was going up rather than going down. And I felt that the agency needed a hypothesis about why that was, and we needed to therefore have a strategy on how we might pivot our activities to try to drive that indicator of killed and seriously injured downward and change that trajectory. So in February, we published this top-to-bottom review of Vision Zero, and we published in that 5 early momentum actions we were going to take. As part of that review, we went and pursued a bunch of federal grants. We got a $25 million Safer Streets grant to do actual streets projects. But something that might be relevant to all of you is we got a smaller Smart Cities grant to use machine learning to analyze live video from our complex intersections. We have a light rail line that runs through Seattle, and in the south part of Seattle, it runs at grade. And we have a lot of conflicts in those intersections between the train, pedestrians, people waiting to get on transit, trying to get off transit, and all kinds of vehicles and bikes. And so we've just won this grant to see if we could identify near misses in these complex intersections by having like a artificial intelligence or machine learning analysis of video from that intersection, where the video could say, this is a train, this is a pedestrian, this is a car. Oh my gosh, this car almost turned left into this crossing pedestrian. It's interesting because near misses are not reported. They're not known. So imagine if we could identify opportunities for safety interventions based on near misses before somebody gets hurt or killed. And so I think we'll be going out with some kind of RFP for like technology to help support this project. And I think that's very, very exciting. The second thing is, we're preparing to kind of punch above our weight as a 750,000 person city and host this global event, the World Cup, along with other cities. And we had a practice run last summer. We had Major League Baseball in town for a week for the All-Star game, a week full of events. And we made the regional transit system free on the day of the All-Star game and set a new record for transit ridership that day. And we also had 1,300 rides of our shared e-bikes and scooters to the stadium and from the stadium, which is a lot of averted trips. We made a whole we put down all these green arrows to make like a path on one of our best protected bikeways on 2nd Avenue to show people how they could get there walking or rolling. And we were able to get a lot of people in those modes. And then the next weekend, Taylor Swift came to town. That actually turned out to be bigger. Like Taylor Swift hit a new record for hotel revenue in a weekend in the history of Seattle. And we hit another new record on transit use on both of the 2 nights of her concerts. And part of what we found in this experience is we have better, closer connections with some of our modes and the operators of those services than others. Like Uber and Lyft are regulated at the more at the state level, and they were more kind of doing their own thing, whereas since we franchise the scooter and bike share operators, we could like really work closely with them on expanding like parking for those devices and figuring out how to surge on that. We did find, for example, that by making transit free, we ended up with a lot of people standing in the street waiting for the light rail after the game because the light rail platform wasn't big enough to receive all these people. So we're really interested, are there technology solutions to help plan and implement low carbon transportation to and from complex events? And the World Cup's going to involve many different places where people want to go because there's all these events, side events for fans who don't have tickets to the game. And so we're really interested in, are there sort of like technology-oriented solutions to plan and coordinate how you would bring a whole bunch of different low-carbon modes together in a high destination in a way where they're not all fighting each other for curb space and other things. So those are our two ideas. And we have a lot of like smart tech-savvy people at SDOT that I can connect you with. It's a 1,100-person agency, and we're building a lot of capacity and implementing these new things. So thank you so much.
Thanks, Greg. All right, I will ask Greg stay up there, and then if the rest of our panelists can get on the stage. And I'll open it up for questions. Do you have a solution? Do you have thoughts around processes that can help Dre? Or thoughts around how to help identify near misses in Seattle?
Hi there, Austin Stanyon from Go Triangle, a regional transit provider in the Triangle of North Carolina. My thought or question is for Dre in the ports of Hawaii. The problem statement you mentioned was focused on the impact of climate change on the ports and the planning and strategies and sort of funding needed to adapt. And my question and idea is, have you thought about the sort of climate mitigation potential? As in, I assume that the ports are also one of Hawaii's major sources of greenhouse gases, as well as the sort of local pollution that can come in neighborhoods near ports. And I'm wondering if you sort of approach from like a two-pronged, like adapt the ports to meet, to be climate resilient, but also implement policies to reduce the impact of the ports on greenhouse gases and on the local population, if that might open up opportunities for funding, like political will to get things done. I know the ports of LA and Long Beach have green port initiatives. So I'm wondering if it's possible to kind of look at it from both ways to open up doors.
Thanks for that. So yes, we're looking at that. The Department of Transportation, not just the harbors operations, is looking at converting our vehicle fleet and looking at how we electrify the waterfront, right? So it's a little cleaner. However, the issues that we're dealing with are today issues. And so we are in the process of building an 84-acre cargo terminal. It's brand new. Whoever designed it thought it was a good idea to build it up 3 feet higher. However, that's not the right treatment for all the ports because we'll just create a dam and flood out disadvantaged communities that live around the port. So that's not the option for everywhere in the harbor. But when we talk about that and the investments in infrastructure, I estimate that if we didn't have to raise the pier heights, right, if there's a drainage technology or just some other way to engineer it, we could reduce the infrastructure cost and the amount of concrete that we need and the amount of in-water work we need to do. And one thing that I'll just leave you with, like when we talk about today problems, I saw a vessel that calls to Hawaii and calls to Long Beach, offload in both ports. The ramp, it's a row vessel, right, roll on, roll off. And the ramp from the vessel at Long Beach is about 10-degree angle. When it comes to Honolulu, it's a 45-degree angle. So that's where our sea levels and our piers are compared to other ports. So we can't afford to have that ramp angle increase anymore. So while we are looking at big long-term solutions that will help with the mitigation, there are solutions that we need to start working on yesterday. So yeah, I think we're looking at the combination of all, right? Long-term, short-term, mid-range, of course. But yes, absolutely open to any other ideas about what we need to look at today and tomorrow.
I'm Heather from the city of San Diego, and if you haven't talked to our port folks, I've got some people to tell.
I am talking to them on Monday.
Awesome. Okay. We have done a ton of work on this, and obviously it's not just the commercial port, but a whole bunch of the economy is tied to the waterfront. So it's not just what you need for your commercial ports, but what your private ports need, what your all of your drainage and all of that stuff. So yeah.
Thank you.
Hi, I'm Thibaut Gaston, co-founder and CEO of Vianova. I had a question for Greg, regarding the near misses. So we've done some work with TfL, Transport for London, recently on the near misses, specifically actually the near misses for vulnerable road users. And we utilized data from connected vehicles, specifically actually telematics unit in the trucks and vans, and mapping actually near misses with braking events and ADAS information. I'm curious to hear whether you think this could be something that could actually complement the video analytics at the intersection level, and whether you utilize such data already.
That's a great question. So he's asking about, is there a different way to understand near misses from information you can get from vehicles that are actually able to share their location in a given point in time? And that intrigues us too. And I think part of what big city DOTs are imagining is a world where more and more of the vehicles are able to share where they are, or maybe even share with each other where there's a hazard. And how would we kind of be the intermediary between that? However, the most vulnerable users maybe aren't transmitting, right? The cyclist, the person on the scooter. Potentially the scooter itself could be transmitting. Well, yeah, people have cell phones for sure, but also the person who's walking isn't looking at their cell phone. They're not going to be, oh yeah, I should stop because someone's about to turn left, I'm jaywalking. They might not be looking at their phones. So we're looking at all these different things layered together, but we do think that the machine vision analysis could be a near-term opportunity to identify near misses before we are able to have more information from more and more of the users. But, we are already, the old days when you wanted to do a traffic study, you put a pneumatic tube across the road and measure, and that was a very unreliable data collection means. Now a lot of our data collection is from anonymized cell phone data, and by how fast it's going, you can understand what mode it is. So we're using that already and making street design decisions.
And I will make a plug that both the MTA and Port Authority in New York, the tolling authorities, they're looking for more efficient ways to collect data for tolling. So if that could be applied to that space, maybe a conversation to be had.
Actually, in the same vein, Alex Ness, a co-founder of Drover AI, we actually work with Vianova, feeding some data into their platform. We love the idea of computer vision and machine learning because we apply it to actually moving 2- and 3-wheel vehicles, so scooters and bikes, and it's designed to get that information that is less static than what you might find from an intersection, and being able to plot near misses that occur because of a bike lane obstruction, for example, right, where we can identify that a bike lane is being blocked, give you those coordinates, and potentially identify infrastructure improvements that could be made to protect the bike lane. Any thoughts on using data from not just moving vehicles, but moving vehicles that have the machine learning capability to identify the near miss was with a pedestrian, because we can detect whether it's a pedestrian or a cyclist or another kind of modality, feeding all of that into the intersection data as well.
Yeah, that does sound intriguing, the idea of getting some digital piece of information that all of a sudden the cyclists that would normally be going down this bike route are making a detour, and you could ask yourself why. Of course, one of our other challenges, right, is every city in America has a shortage of police officers right now, and so they're all doing less traffic enforcement, and sometimes that also affects parking enforcement. So knowing about something doesn't mean you can always do something about it. there is a world where we'll end up knowing about a ton of things, but we might not have the capacity to make a quick response to them. I'd still like to know about them, and maybe knowing about them could cause some different budgetary decisions to be able to act on them. A couple years ago, Salita Reynolds, who used to run LADOT, said that a modern DOT needs to be able to breathe in and breathe out data. And that stuck with me. And, I'm trying to help my team make SDOT one of those type of organizations.
One more quick plug for a successful technology solution. So we had a company, Grid Matrix, come through our program. They worked with the Port Authority for a pilot, and they, over 10 cameras through the tunnels and bridges in the Port Authority, they were able to identify 40 key congestion metrics, and they could identify real-time misses with 95% accuracy. So I can make the connection afterwards to that. Other questions?
Hi, it's another question for Greg, I'm afraid. Oh, okay. Hi, I'm Anna from Eloy in the UK. We're a connected vehicle software business focused on multi-vehicle coordination. One of our first products we've just released actually is how to improve traffic flow to and from events, particularly around things like car park throughput. We're working with the NEC in the UK, which is the largest events venue. We're currently very focused on private motor vehicles, just because it's kind of quite easy point of entry and we can get inside vehicles. You obviously mentioned sustainable travel. Is that really one of your challenges, as well as improving kind of general traffic flow, trying to get more people onto public transport and more sustainable travel to and from events?
So, something I learned right away when I moved to Seattle that is really different than my experience in LA is Seattle is physically constrained like a long, skinny north-south city and growing extremely fast. It's doubled in population in the last 30 years, and we're now at 750,000. We're expecting to reach 1 million in the next few decades. And so everything we do has to be through the lens, every policy we consider has to be through the lens of intense growth. And we just don't have space for another 250,000 people if everybody's going to bring their own private vehicle and try to drive. And, it's not that any other city ever really succeeded in building their way out of congestion. It's like a 50-year experiment that's failed because you add lanes and then more people drive. I worked on the 405 widening here, and it does have more capacity, but it's no faster than it ever was. But we have this particular need in general commuting and special events to try to get people to shift modes. Beyond even the need for reducing carbon emissions, it's actually what's going to keep the city livable. And so I think the special events in a way sometimes are like an angle we can use to drive behavior change. A really cool experiment this year is, the Climate Pledge Arena is our hockey stadium, and Amazon sponsored it and put that name on it, and so they have a very big sustainability program. So our hockey team, the Kraken, offered a free transit ticket digitally that goes with your hockey ticket. And we got all these hockey fans who often coming in from the suburbs to take the light rail, park and ride at the end of the light rail, take the light rail and then the monorail to the game. And so it's very intriguing how sports and concerts might be a way to get people on lower carbon modes, and then they decide, gosh, this is great. I have had people tweet at me that the best way to get to the baseball game in Seattle is on scooter. It's literally the fastest way to get there because of all the congestion around the stadium.
Thank you. I think we have time for one more question. Okay.
Hi, I'm Oroskan also from the UK, from a company called Mole, and we're automating EV charging, and I'd love to talk to Craig and Greg about how that works for disabled people after the session. But my question was something for each of you. We've talked about different solutions and solving different problems in the transport system, which are all kind of originating a lot from behavior, which drives certain ways of things happening in the transport system. So how are each of you in your context thinking about influencing that behavior change and your administration and do you see kind of that as a frontier for a more effective way to kind of solve some of these problems? Yeah, thank you.
That's a good question as well. I think for us, it's really about how do we normalize getting someone out of their personal vehicle into something that's going to take a little bit longer, right? It's going to add a little bit longer to the trip time, and how do we communicate a value of what that actually means? So for me personally, I found out that when I ride the bus, it takes me a little bit longer to get home, but by the time I get home, I'm ready to be present when I'm at home, right? That unwind time happens while I'm on that vehicle. So being able to share those kind of stories, I think, helping to normalize it through special events as well, when people are generally in a good mood, right? In a good mood and associated with a good time, I think is important to be able to communicate the value.
Yeah, I think behavior change is critical, and I'm more of a believer in making other modes, low carbon modes, really attractive rather than sort of browbeating people to get out of their car. I'm role modeling it because I left my car in LA, and I'm using transit every day. I don't have a car in Seattle, and it's actually made me understand the system much better. But people do find it interesting that, it's actually relatively rare that people who run the transportation actually rely on public transportation. So at least I'm trying to start it that way.
Yeah, and for us, it's really that accessibility lens on the development of our programs and working with infrastructure providers and making sure that's done sort of upfront in the process rather than being an afterthought. I think data helps us understand where the needs are. But I also think, for us, revelations around, sure, it's maybe making the train accessible or making a car more user-friendly for accessibility needs, but it's also those who interact with that train or interact with that car. So going back to vulnerable road users, as Greg was talking about, there's different ways in which the accessibility community sees the need, to be aware of, if they're automated vehicles, what do they look and sound like, and how are they going to pick up sort of unusual road crossings and equipment that you may have, mobility aids. So all of these things, I think it's building an awareness, making that shift, that it's really important that we expand our horizons and how we think about accessibility, and why it's important to get it right sort of up front and then continue it through the design process.
And I think for us, the behaviors that I'm trying to influence today are our engineers, right? And our planners, because they hadn't been thinking about it. So every project that we work on, we've got to get some climate change, sea level rise consideration into that planning process. So that's the first step. And then the second step is just expanding that influence, I guess, to beyond our internal and to our harbor users, right, the shipping companies, and then to the neighboring landowners, because I want to make sure that the city that runs the storm water system that outfalls into the harbor, that we don't build up something that works for our purposes but ignores theirs. So I think the influence at the end of the day is just on how we think beyond our own facilities, how they'll impact others, in addition to just how sea level rise or climate change is going to impact our facility.
Great. Well, thank you all. One more round of applause for all of our public sector leaders sharing their challenges.